Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu as a Ranker. On this episode, we are going to be discussing the discography of the English rock band Blur. Formed in London in 1988, the band consists of Damon Albarn on vocals, Graham Coxon on guitars, Alex James on bass and Chainsmoking, and Dave Rowntree on drums. Initially, the band were part of the post-Stone Roses baggy scene, and were heavily marketed towards an American audience. But after a disastrous tour of the US promoting their debut album, the band decided to change tact and head in an ultra-British direction, with Damon affecting a very London accent in his singing and using very specific English vernacular in his lyrics. And this coincided with the emergence of Britpop, and Blur was soon carried to the peak of success, rivaling Oasis for the title of biggest band in the UK during that era. As the genre of Britpop ran out of steam, the band changed direction again and switched into a more avant-garde art rock act and continued to gain both critical and commercial success. In 2003, guitarist Graham Coxon left the band in acrimonious fashion due to clashing with frontman Damon Albarn over artistic differences. After his departure, Blur made one record without him before finally splitting up. Then, after almost a decade apart, during which time Damon Albarn had had some huge success with his other band Gorillaz, the band finally came back together with Coxon for a reunion tour, which eventually led to one last studio album in 2015. Currently, the band are not really together but also not really broken up, with most members concluding that they'll probably get together again to do something at some nebulous point in time. And as for my own fandom, well, much like Oasis, I've never really been into Blur all that much. I mean, I've always thought they were a great singles band, but I've also always felt disappointed whenever I've sporadically checked out an LP of theirs, to the point where, I've dismissed them publicly several times. But that said, I haven't listened to one of their records for quite some time now, so let's see if a deep dive into the band's 8 studio albums is enough to change my perception. So, without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are the studio albums of Blur, ranked from worst to best. So, we're going to be kicking off this list with Leisure from 1991, which was the band's debut album. And this album right here predates Britpop, so it has very little to do with the soundscapes that we would normally associate with that scene. But it is very much a record of its time though, as it tries to straddle what was popular in the UK, which was the whole post-Stone Roses baggy thing, and what was popular in the US, which was grunge. I mean, it's a pretty tall order to meld those two things effectively, and although I do appreciate where the band are coming from, they do skew pretty wide of the mark on this. And this record has a few really glaring faults that stops it in its tracks. First is the production, which relies far too heavily on grungy distortion. I mean, often you'll hear Graham Coxon laying down guitarists that have some serious potential, only for that potential to be undone by unnecessary layers of distortion. And this also leads the record onto its second major issue, which is the lack of tonal variety. These songs all have a very similar sound palette, leading a lot of the weaker tunes to congeal together into a florid, grungy mess. And this is compounded yet again by the third major issue, which is overlength. I mean, 50 minutes is just way too long for an album with so little tonal change-up. However, buried within the murk are a few really good tunes that point towards the potential of the band. Both the big singles, She's So High and There's No Other Way, are incredibly catchy, and the guitar riff on There's No Other Way in particular is absolutely sublime. My favourite off of this though is the track Sing, which points towards the band's future as experimental art rockers, with a nice building shoegaze soundscape, relentless pianos and mysteriously buried vocals. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, despite a couple of great tunes, this is a swampy mess of an LP that overall is, unfortunately, just not that much fun to listen to. Next up, we have the band's self-titled album from 1997, which was their 5th LP. And this album sees the band moving away from Britpop, as after the perceived quote-unquote failure of their previous LP, The Great Escape, the band became disenchanted with the trappings of the genre, instead letting Graham Coxon steer the ship towards his love of lo-fi American garage rock. To that end, this record sees the band stripping things back to indie rock basics, dropping the sweeping string and horn sections and replacing them with experimental leanings and a newfound sense of existential darkness. And to be honest, it's a welcome change, as despite its general quality and success, the old Britpop sound had kind of run its course at this point. A change was needed, so a change was duly delivered. As much as I admire the artistic impetus though, I do think this record has the occasional wobble. I mean, whilst there are some obvious bangers on this, there's also a clutch of tracks that really don't do that much for me. I mean, I wouldn't call any of them bad tracks per se, but a few of them are a bit on the underbaked side. MOR is a good example of that. It's like a microcosm of how I feel about the weaker material on this in general. The track was actually released as a single, so it's mildly catchy and has an almost hooky sensibility, but ultimately falls short in that regard. Likewise, the musical composition of it is kind of fuzzy and energetic, but stops short of being actually banging or particularly memorable. And so it goes for the weaker moments here. Theme from Retro is a lukewarm instrumental, Chinese Bombs is punky but with nothing to really anchor its bluster. I mean, How I Feel About Moving On is almost like a carbon copy of what I said about MOR, and closer Essex Dogs is admirably weird but also not particularly tuneful or interesting. But like I said, there are undeniable bangers here. All the singles except maybe MOR are great. Opener Beetlebum is an almost gothic garage rock slice of drug-addled psychedelic darkness. Song 2 is 2 minutes of energetic fury and tons of iconic fun, and On Your Own calls forward to what Damon would do with Gorillaz, impressing with its jumbled rhythms and shouty chorus. But there's also far more to this than just the singles. You're So Great is a lo-fi acoustic track that sounds almost like an Escape demo, but in a very nice, emotionally raw kind of way, whilst album highlight Death of a Party has a cool art rock soundscape to frame Damon's dour teenage suicide themed lyrics, and that simple nagging guitar riff is pretty damn memorable. So yeah, I mean, despite this ranking second to last on this list, I still really like this record. We've already turned a corner here. I mean, we are already into records that I really enjoy, and it's really weird to be already into records I enjoyed this low on the list, but yeah, that's where we are. So for those of you who feared a relentless murder of Blur's credibility, you can allay those fears because this list is definitely not trending in that direction. Next up we have Think Tank from 2003, which was the band's 7th LP, and this is the one that the band recorded after guitarist Graham Coxon quit due to a growing musical rift that had developed between him and Damon Albarn. Thankfully, the band made the wise choice to neither replace nor try to emulate Coxon's style, instead crafting an almost entirely new sound. On this you have a lot of minimalism, as the record uses space and quietness in an almost post-rock kind of way. The tracks are built up around low grooving bass work, ambient or subtle synth lines, and loose nebulous compositions. And the result is an album that is incredibly relaxing, with the focus all about the atmospheric texturing and overall flow. And to that end, considering the type of record it's trying to be, I think it's pretty damn good and succeeds at meeting its aims. Each track furthers the overall atmosphere and manages to convey the desired emotional palette, and the flow of the record is great and it's noticeably devoid of clunkers that might otherwise disrupt the vibe. And as always with this type of record, there's not that much point to single out individual highlights. That said, Out of Time has a low paranoid android kind of vibe to it. On the Way to the Club has a good subtle build up and a cool drum machine workout. Sweet Song has a delightful warmth to it with its distant pianos and haunting backing harmonies, and Battery in Your Leg is an utterly beautiful closing ballad with some nicely layered sound and a gorgeous melody. So yeah, I mean, although this is definitely a certain record for a certain time, I like it quite a bit. I mean, the only negative thing I can really say about it is that I like Blur with Coxon rather than without Coxon, and Crazy Beat has some distorted backing vocals that dredge up some old trauma relating to that fucking crazy frog. Ning 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 ning. So, but otherwise, just very good stuff. And so, it's time. If you have an angry disposition, go ahead and pop that Xanax. If you're a rage quitter, best just turn off the video right now. If you have a heart condition or of a physically weak disposition, just go ahead and lean against the wall. It's controversy time. Coming in next, we have Parklife from 1994, which was the band's third LP and also their huge mainstream breakthrough. And on this, Blur turned their attention towards working class London life, crafting a set of individual character vignettes with a bouncing, upbeat guitar pop soundscape that would go on to become one of the definitive sounds of the Britpop era. And yeah, as I already intimated, this is a very controversial placing for this particular record, as it's widely regarded as the band's masterwork. So, the burning question is, why is it ranked so low? Well, there are a myriad of factors to that answer, which, I'll dive into, but before I do, I will note that I do really like this record, and we are in rock solid 4-star territory here. But do I think this record is perfect? No. Do I think it's overrated? Well, yeah, kind of. And I'm going to tell you why. I mean, first off, we have the opening track, Girls and Boys, the disco glide of which is immediately nostalgic, but the track feels like such a non sequitur. It feels like a bonus track, only added onto the front of the album rather than the end. It's a total false start, and I feel like the record only really kicks off properly with the next track, Tracy Jacks. I mean, it just feels like the record starts, stops, and then has to restart again. It's really weird. And adding to those sequencing woes would be the back-to-back pairing of The Debt Collector and Far Out. I mean, I like the music hall instrumental nature of The Debt Collector, but when paired up with the short acoustic fluff of Far Out, it just kind of kills the momentum of the album. It feels like an intermission that just drags on for a bit too long. And then there are a couple of tracks that I just don't like very much, and they also come back to back, and those would be the late album duo of London Loves and Trouble in the Message Centre. London Loves has a really kind of sickly melody that I just don't care for at all, and Trouble at the Message Centre, although far better than London Loves, has an odd robotic sheen to it that I just don't particularly dig. So yeah, I mean, those faults are not particularly egregious to be honest, but when combined with the fact that I absolutely love the next bunch of albums on this list, they're enough to stall Parklife here at the number 5 spot. But as I already mentioned, I still really like this record and there are plenty of great highlights on it. Tracy Jacks is incredibly punky and catchy. Title track Parklife is so damn iconic that you almost expect someone like Vic and Bob or Keith Allen to kick in your door and join in with the sing-along chorus. To the End is an absolutely amazing Parisian ballad that feels like dancing in a giant hall with the one you love, long after the party is finished and everybody has gone home. Bad Head has an emotive jangle lilt about it. This Is a Low is a very Smithian tribute to the coastal towns of England, and The Thumping Jubilee really should have been released as a single because it's just monstrously catchy. So yeah, Parklife is a really, really great album filled with historical pop significance. I really, really love it, but as good as it is, ultimately, it's just not my favourite Blur album. Next up we have The Magic Whip, which was the band's 8th and final album from 2015. And this album came about because the band got stranded in Hong Kong for 5 days after the Japanese festival that they were due to play at got suddenly cancelled. So to cure boredom, the band went into a local studio and basically came out with the bones of this LP. And this record definitely soaked up the atmosphere of Hong Kong, as it feels urbane but in a very Asian neon-soaked kind of way. And that inspiration also extended into the lyrics, as they often make reference to places in the Asian sphere. And yeah, this album is absolutely fantastic, especially considering its origin and position as an unexpected and unplanned comeback record. And it works really well as a final record too, as it's something of an overview for the band, as it melds their late period atmospheric art rock with catchier moments that call back to the band's Britpop roots. Yet crucially, the record isn't focused on nostalgia at all. The overview aspect is merely an organic byproduct of the songwriting, as this album also forges ahead and ploughs its own identity. And as for the songs themselves, they're excellent. In fact, this is one of the most consistent and cohesive track lists that the band ever put to tape. Every track is its own highlight, yet each also furthers the overall atmosphere of the record. Standouts on a pretty flawless LP include New World Towers, which has a beautiful creeping sadness to it. Go Out is amazing with its rhythmic guitars and is super catchy without ever losing its subtlety. I Thought I Was a Spaceman is a gorgeous building post-rock ballad that hits all the right melodic and emotional notes. There Are Too Many of Us has a military marching beat that leads the track from subtle to epic. Ghost Ship has a lovely bluesy guitar from Coxsone. Pyongyang has a synth-soaked gothic post-punk glide to it, and Ong Ong is a great change of pace with its stomping catchy pop. I mean, the only negative thing I can really level at this record is the fact that it just lacks a killer single, which is something they could have totally resolved by including the standalone single Under the Westway. I mean, why is that song not on this record? It's an absolutely fantastic tune and fits this album's tone like a glove. I really think they missed a trick there, but even without a killer single, this LP is still all kinds of wonderful, absolutely amazing stuff. Coming in next, we have The Great Escape from 1995, which was the band's fourth LP, and this record came out at the height of Britpop and saw Blur go toe-to-toe with their arch-rivals Oasis. The so-called Battle of Britpop saw the two bands releasing lead singles for their incoming albums on the same day. Oasis had the classic fug rock of Roll With It, while Blur had the seemingly flippant pop of country house primed for battle. As is often mooted about, Blur won the battle, beating Oasis to the number 1 spot in the singles chart, but was ultimately dealt an executioner's blow when What's the Story Morning Glory turned out to be one of the most iconic albums of the 90s. And the backlash to this was pretty extreme, as The Great Escape had initially received glowing reviews, but post What's the Story Morning Glory, the critics started to retract their opinions, or in the case of Melody Maker, proffer written apologies to its readers. Britpop, eh? What a time to be alive. So, let's get this sorted. Like decades after the fact, Chuchu is a Ranker is going to have the final word on this. Never more to be spoken of by anyone. Is The Great Escape as good as What's the Story Morning Glory? No, it's not. But is it a slightly lesser yet also spectacular album in its own right? Yes it is, very much so. And does Country House absolutely beast Roll With It like a scared dog running from a rolled up newspaper? Yes it does. Although, to be clear, anyone who actually spanks their dog with a rolled up newspaper should probably go hang themselves this instant. But anyway, I digress. Back to the album itself. Here we have part 3 of Blur's Life trilogy. Whereas Modern Life is Rubbish concentrated on the past and Park Life concentrated on the modern working class, The Great Escape focuses on the suburbs and the middle class, which immediately scored the band minus points in the press for being elitist. But if you actually listen to the record, this is a pretty damning account of middle class life. I mean, this album is just full of characters who are bored, lonely, suffering existential crises, or turning to extreme things like wife swapping to numb their day-to-day existence. It's a much darker and more savage record than Park Life, at least on a lyrical footing. But on a musical level, this is Blur pushing the catchy pop elements of their music to their logical conclusion. This album is full of upbeat sounding compositions, with sweeping string sections and skyscraping choruses. I mean, it's just great. And there are more classics than you can shake a stick at here. The siren style guitars that announce the wife swap ode stereotypes are absolutely awesome. Country House is just absolutely brilliant. I mean, it just sounds so peppy and catchy, but closer inspection reveals the song to be about existential dread. Existential bread? Existential dread and depression. And I love the backing vocals that quietly offer the observation, "Blow me out. I am so sad. I don't know why." I mean, for me, that song is just pop perfection. Charmless Man has Graham Coxsone guitarist to die for, while The Universal is just one of the best sweeping ballads of the Britpop era. I absolutely adore that song, from the Scott Walker callbacks to the images of desperate people clinging to their lottery tickets as their dreams implode. It is fantastic. But as always, there's far more than hits on offer here. Best Days has a resigned composition and some beautiful piano work. He Thought of Cars is an existential masterwork with its subtle head-and-hand sadness. Globe Alone is a great late album bit of spiky punk with a lyrical punch, while Closer, Yuko and Hero is a hairs on the back of the neck raising closer about love blossoming in the face of crippling overwork. So yeah, I mean damn, I love this fucking record, like it's 4.5 stars for me, easy. The reason it stalls short of the 5 is that I don't particularly dig the sickly keyboards of Fadeaway, and Top Man is a little throwaway. And at 56 minutes, this album could well be shot of those songs with absolutely no disadvantage. But you know, that shit is just nitpicking. This album is absolutely phenomenal. Next up, we have Modern Life is Rubbish from 1993, which was the band's sophomore LP, and this sees the band moving away from the grunge and the baggy hybrid of their debut into an extremely English Kinks-inspired direction. But the bouncing upbeat pop of Parklife was still a ways off, so here we have the band at the most rockest. And it's just totally badass. It's just the pure sound of 4 lads in a room, beasting their instruments and wrangling out an indie jangle rock masterpiece in the process. At 14 tracks and 58 minutes, one could level the criticism that this record is a bit too long, but then again, there's just no dead wood on this. I mean, what would you take off this record? Personally, I wouldn't want to lose any of these tracks because they're all fucking great. Highlights on a rocking 5-star classic include the opening for Tomorrow, which sets out the template for a million other English-sounding Britpop ballads. Advert has a raw punkiness to it and is extremely catchy. Colin Zeal has an excellent set of stuttering guitar riffs. Tracks like Blue Jeans and Star Shaped act like a preview of coming attractions, giving insights into Blur's next few records. Sunday Sunday is utterly anthemic with its blasting horns. Oily Water is a building art rock epic which could have been an easy highlight on the self-titled LP, while Miss America is all woozy stripped back acoustics and raw emotions. My favourite off of this though probably has to be the absolutely kick-ass single Chemical World. I mean, it's just so damn catchy, and I love Graham Coxon's stop-start guitar dynamics on the track. It is fantastic. And so is the entire album. And a quick nod to the production of the record too. It's just absolutely perfect, putting the raw, energetic quality out of the tunes in just the right way. As I already said, 5 stars for this. I absolutely adore this record, and if I had actually gotten into this properly before making my album of the year list for 1993, yeah, this would have been number 1. This would have won that year. What a silly prick I've been for dismissing Blur all these years. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the Blur gold medal is going to go to 13, which was the band's 6th LP from 1999. And here the band push on the experimental leanings of their self-titled album to the logical limit. I mean, Jesus Christ, like where the fuck has this record been all my life? This is just art rock perfection. I adore every single track on this to the point where this could arguably be a contender for my top 20 albums of all time. I mean, that's just how hard I fell for this record. And where do I start with highlights on this? With the singles, I suppose. Tender is an incredible opener with its memorable guitar work and American Southern gospel tinge. Coffee and TV is a super catchy Graham Coxon fronted jangle masterclass with some really lovely keyboard work, while No Distance Left to Run is as heartbreaking a track as the band ever recorded, as Damon gives his defeated take on his breakup with Justin Frischman of Elastica over a stripped back but beautiful Coxon riff. But the singles are just the tip of the iceberg. Tracks like Bugman and Swamp Song are among the most confident rockers the band ever made, with the latter really summoning images of The Cure out of the ether. Mellow Song starts as an arpeggiated folk number but soon blooms into a beautiful slice of effects-driven art rock. Trailer Park and Battle add some great atmospheric texture to the record. Trim Trab has an awesome build-up and explosion despite Albom's desperately lonely lyrics, whilst my personal favourite highlight, 1992, has an air of crushing sadness about it, with the dramatic wash of effects amplifying the lyrical reminiscence of a love just now scattered to the wind. It's just heartbreaking stuff. But it's the overall ride that really puts this record over the top. It's just so cohesive and sequenced so perfectly, with the atmosphere being so thick that it's just almost stifling. It's just perfect, and my personal pick for Blur's best LP. So, now I've wrapped up my Blur adventure, the question remains, did I gain more appreciation for the band? Well, you've just sat through this episode, so you know the answer is a pretty obvious yes. I mean, someone please throw an egg at me, because I need that shit all over my face immediately. I mean, rarely have I been so blatantly wrong about a band, and I need to retract a good many nasty things that I've said about Blur in the past. Regrets. I've had a few. And also, this just totally and forever puts to bed that age-old question, Oasis or Blur? It's Blur. Like 110% Blur. And that's it. That's my Blur list. But of course that won't be your list, so please sound off in the comment section and tell me how you'd rank these records. Like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Someone please give me a lozenge because my voice is about to just die. Take care of yourself, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.